Brothers and sisters, about 50 years ago, when the Kucinich family had fallen on some hard times and we didn't have a place to live, 5 children and 2 adults were packed in a car that parked on the edge of the industrial valley. And in the evenings, I could see that flame shooting up from the basic oxygen furnace, the tongue of fire reaching high into the darkness. And I remember from my childhood that image, because even though we had fallen on some hard times, there was something about that flame that symbolized hope for me personally and for my family, that somehow there were better days coming. This flame over the city of Cleveland. It was many years later that I had the opportunity to help keep that flame shining brightly over the industrial flats. Many of you know the story. I received a phone call late one night in my congressional office from a young man who was tending the car that ran the coke to the blast furnace, and he said, "They're not running the car anymore. They told us we're not sending any more to the furnace." And I knew instantly what that meant. It meant that they were going to shut down the blast furnace as part of a deal to close the mill in a bankruptcy case. I knew instantly what that meant. I knew that thousands of jobs were on the line. I knew that this city's economic vitality was on the line. And I knew that everything that I ever was or ever could hope to be had to be poured into the moment to try to keep that fire burning and to keep the jobs that it represented going. And so even though we had some naysayers who said, "It is over, Dennis, give it up," we rallied the community, filed lawsuits to block the closing of the blast service, worked with the locals here to create such a powerful presence of the community, insisting that we would save that mill, that we actually created the conditions that resulted not only in a successful effort, one of the few in the country, to save a mill that had been slated to close, but today those works represent the flagship of an international steelmaking corporation, and we in Cleveland are so proud of that effort, and I'm so glad to have played a role in making sure that flame of hope continues to burn over this valley. There are dozens of mills that were shut down. There's one that wasn't, because we in Cleveland had the courage to see it survive, the courage to believe that we could change the outcome. And now we see steel knows better than almost any industry, and steel workers know better than almost any workers about what it's like to train for a lifetime to do a job and to do it well, to have not only the best trained workforce, but the best facilities, to do everything right, have the production efficiencies, and then despite that, to be told, you have to give back, you have to give back, you have to give back, after you've already given back everything you can give, and then people turn around and shut down the plant anyway. We see that Wall Street has really separated itself from the aspirations of Main Street. Wall Street has been about the growth of an economy without regard as to whether or not it's the American economy that's growing. Wall Street has been about consolidation. It hasn't been about protecting health care benefits or pensions or jobs. It's not about that. And so what we've seen as a result in the last dozen years in this country is grass growing in parking lots where they used to make steel, where they used to make cars, where they used to make aircraft parts, where they used to make washing machines, they used to make bicycles, and now there's grass growing in the parking lots. Our whole way of life in this country been changed. So much uncertainty in so many families across America. And the tragic truth of it all, didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. Because America, which is the largest consumer of steel in the world, had the productive capacity to be able to meet the needs of consumers all over this country. It didn't have to happen. But we saw that when NAFTA was brought forward by a Democratic administration, we saw a change where all the rules changed. There weren't any rules. You know, those of you who have been at negotiating tables, what happened after NAFTA? The whole bargaining dynamic changed. You couldn't bargain for wages anymore. It was a question of whether the plant was going to stay open or not. So wages, health care benefits, pension benefits, everything became up for grabs. The bargaining power of labor was not just reduced, in some cases it was nullified with the passage of NAFTA. We saw an erosion of our industrial base. We saw actually a decline of America's ability to defend itself because we're no longer making a lot of the things that we made as part of our national defense. We saw an $800 billion trade deficit, $250 billion of it from China. China doesn't have to wage a phony global war on terror because they're spending money building their economy. They're spending money building their manufacturing base. And what are we doing? We're borrowing money from China to prosecute a war in Baghdad that's based on lies. And Wall Street's looking to China now as a place for great investment opportunities, so they say, and as a place to borrow money so that Wall Street can get money from China to help fuel the growth of these initial public offerings from these hedge funds. This is how insane this situation has become. When I was growing up in Cleveland, we had this myth that said, you know, if you get a shovel and you start digging a hole, and you dig it deep enough, you're going to get to China. We're there. So where are we at this moment? We're actually fighting to reclaim America. And we're fighting for America. And I want to lay out for you a program that involves what it would look like for a labor president, for someone who comes right from your ranks to be able to be president of the United States, how it will change things dramatically for working men and women in this country. It begins with a program that I would like to affectionately name HAFTA. Oh, you know where this is going. Number one, we have to get rid of NAFTA. Number one. Number two, we have to withdraw from the WTO. Number two. Number three, we have to have trade based on workers' rights. And number four, we have to have an American manufacturing policy to begin with. So, let me outline very briefly, before we go to questions, the elements of this HAFTA platform. First of all, with respect to NAFTA, you have candidates who have been in national politics for quite a while. Some have run for the highest office or have been on a ticket, and they'll all say, well, you know, we're going to fix NAFTA. Right. It was the Democratic Party that brought NAFTA forward. That's why we lost the Congress, lest we forget, in 1994, when American workers felt they were abandoned. Look, I know what NAFTA did. I've seen the effects of NAFTA. And that's why I pledge to you that one of my first acts in office will be to cancel NAFTA, period. And then we go to trade. We set the standards for trade. What are those standards? Workers' rights. Any country we do trade with has to grant their workers the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, the right to strike, the right to decent wages and benefits, the right to a safe workplace, the right to be able to sue their employer if they're injured on the job in an unsafe work, the right to participate in a political process, the right to a secure retirement. These workers' rights have to be written into trade agreements. And we have to have prohibitions on child labor, slave labor, prison labor. We have to have the protection of the air and the water and the land built right into the trade agreements. Now, these individuals who say they're running for president and they're going to fix NAFTA, if they don't say they're going to cancel NAFTA, they're not going to fix it. Because the truth of the matter is, the WTO has already said very clearly that any attempt to interfere with basic trade is seen as a barrier to trade and therefore cannot stand. This is why communities and states are already seeing laws that have passed at a local and state level overturned. This is why Buy America can't be maintained, because it's seen as a barrier to trade. Everyone knows this. So I don't want anyone running for president to say, well, they're going to fix NAFTA. They're either going to cancel it and start over, or they're going to keep going and keeping that old horse moving forward with that carrot of cancellation in front until the horse drops from malnutrition. Withdrawing from the WTO is mandatory because we have to set new standards for trade. And we can't do it as long as this structure doesn't let us guide ourselves from our highest principles. And with respect to having workers' rights in all trade agreements, this then becomes a basis for lifting up conditions all over the world. And isn't it time that we had an American manufacturing policy where the maintenance of steel, automotive, aerospace, and shipping is seen as vital to our national economic security, our national defense. This is who we are. And so what do I propose? Imagine this, putting millions of people back to work, rebuilding America's infrastructure, rebuilding our bridges, our water systems, our sewer systems, our roads, building mass transit, the kind of steel that you can pour into that effort. We could reopen plants all over this country. And that's what we should be thinking about doing. And when we have a new trade structure, we'll be able to do that. But an American manufacturing policy that's plugged into a Rooseveltian-type WPA that puts America back to work will put millions of people back to work and will keep steel workers working on the job and expanding once again the service to this country. In addition to that, I know that the steel workers have been working closely with the Sierra Club and other environmental groups on the Apollo project. Think what it's going to mean to have a president who knows labor and who's sensitive to the concerns of working people, because that's where I come from, to say we're going to have a new WGA, a Works Green Administration, where we create millions of new jobs, retrofitting homes with wind and solar technologies, insulating homes, creating new energy technologies which will put millions of people back to work, and we're going to be involved vitally with manufacturing unions as a way of doing that. Because this is the way we start to build our economy. This is the way we catch the wave of the future. We're talking about creating jobs here. Now, one of the great frauds in this election, among a few, is over the issue of health care. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen Michael Moore's movie, Sicko, but it's worth seeing, and let me tell you why. These candidates who come up here and they say, well, they're for health care, they're for universal health care. You know, even the insurance companies are for universal health care, as long as the government is providing them with subsidies. But I want all of you to think now about your own families. Think of how the premiums, the co-pays, and the deductibles are locking families into a diminishing lifestyle. We just can't afford to be sick. We know that health insurance companies make money not providing health care, but we also know that even if you have a job, it doesn't solve your problems with respect to your health care needs, because half of the bankruptcies in America are connected directly to people not being able to pay their doctor bills. That's a fact. These insurance companies have such a hold on Washington that some of the candidates for president, who happen to be Democrats, are saying, well, you know, we really can't take them on, but we've got a great idea. We'll provide more subsidy to them so they'll cover a few more people. Are you kidding? This is a defining purpose of our nation, the health of its people. This should be considered a basic right in a democratic society. This should be considered a elevated purpose of nationhood. How in the world can anyone who would call themselves a Democrat throw in the lot with the private insurers or say, I'm sorry, I can't challenge them? Well, let me tell you something. You're looking at the one person running for president who's ready right now to challenge those insurance companies and to reclaim health care and to get the for-profit insurers out of the health care business, to reclaim the health of the people of this nation, to make it that no one has to go broke, to give you back your power at the bargaining table where health care is not an issue anymore, to reclaim our manufacturing base because health care is not an issue anymore. I tell you, this is a central issue in this election. Imagine someone running for President of the United States and they say, well, you know, we just can't take on those insurance interests. We're fighting for America, and I say we can. We're fighting for America, and I say that we can not only protect Social Security and keep Wall Street's hands off of Social Security, I'm saying that we can not only protect that Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation and firm it up, but I'm saying that we can change the bankruptcy laws so that any time one of these companies try to jettison their obligations for pensions for America's workers, that we say that the workers have to be right up there with the banks, number one, or in front of them if there's going to be any kind of a bankruptcy. Then we'll see how many bankruptcies there are. Let the banks find out that the workers are right up there with them. And then you see how all of a sudden, oh, well, maybe bankruptcy isn't the option. We need to take the golden parachutes off the backs of some of those executives who are ready to just take off while the workers lose everything they've worked a lifetime for. And we need to make sure that your children, no matter what the circumstances are in this country, your children will be guaranteed an opportunity for a decent education. I've sat on a subcommittee for years of the Government Oversight Committee that had jurisdiction over the Department of Defense. Do you know we found that there's over $1 trillion in accounts that can't be reconciled? $1 trillion in the Pentagon. They have over 1,100 separate accounting systems. They can't even keep track. We'll spend $1 to $2 trillion on this war. What for? The Pentagon budget keeps expanding at a rapid pace. Well, this administration beats the drums in a phony war on terror. Let me tell you something. We need to have a strong defense, but we better have a president who knows the difference between defense and offense. Because when we go on the offense and we attack nations who don't attack us, that makes us less weak. That undermines our military. That undermines our effectiveness. And I intend to be a president who defends this country. But look, I was a third-string quarterback on a not very good varsity football team, and I know the difference between offense and defense. And you better have a president who does. We're fighting for America. We're fighting to regain our basic civil liberties. As president, one of my first acts in office will be to cancel the Patriot Act and to make sure that we... What? You're not patriots? This is one of the scams that has been run in this country, where you have to claim you're for the Patriot Act or you're not patriotic. The Patriot Act has undermined unions' ability. It has been an attack on our right to associate. It has been an attack on basic privacy and civil liberties. I say it's time to get government out of the business of prying into people's reading lists, into their financial records, into their medical records, into the labor unions' records, and to get government doing what it's supposed to do: create jobs, give people opportunities, freedom. We're fighting for America. And we're fighting for accountability in government. It's time that those who are the highest officials in the land have the highest standards. Any union official here, if you're caught not following the highest standards, you're put up on charges. Well, I believe if you have a Vice President of the United States who lied to get this country into a war, he ought to be impeached. He ought to be removed from office. It's time. It's time to have accountability. No commutations, no pardons. Who are we as a nation? Let us lift this nation up. Let us lift it up and call for high standards. Let us reclaim our greatness. Let us find strength through peace. And let us remember that light that shines over so many valleys in this country. The light that gives hope to workers everywhere. The light that symbolizes progress and jobs. The light that symbolizes America's strength and hope for the future. Let's keep those fires burning. Let's keep that light glowing in the skies of this country. And let's bring back steel. Thank you very much.
One for you, one for your wife.
Hey, Dennis.
We're going to take questions.
Who have we missed?
Chuck, where are you?
I'm here. I'm just looking for people who've had their hand up for a long time who didn't get to ask any questions.
If you had your hand up, grab a seat. We're going to take questions.
Hi, Dennis. Linda Howard, Sharon, Pennsylvania. I'm right here in front of you. There
Hi,
you
Linda.
are.
Hi.
I would like to know your views on giving amnesty to illegal aliens, what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, the question relates to amnesty to illegal aliens. Let me, first of all, let me show you how I view this issue. You know, at its core, what this whole immigration debate's been about is an attempt by some to try to legitimatize slave labor. Now, you know, this is the oldest story in humanity, cheap labor. You know, it's what slavery was built on. And we've had a disgraceful condition where immigrants came north of the border to work, and they worked under conditions where they're controlled workforce, where they had no guarantees for the pittance they were going to be paid, had no control over their working conditions, basically a docile slave labor working force. I've heard of cases where immigrants would go in and work for a couple weeks, months, not get paid, and then when they're told it's time for the pay to arrive, that's when the INS comes in. I mean, this is the kind of racket that's going on. So in a way, it's so important for labor to be part of an effort to support the rights of immigrants. Now, do we have to control our border? Of course, but you have to remember that the tempo of immigration increased considerably once NAFTA passed. People in Mexico were told their wages were going to go up. They went down. The peso collapsed, and millions began to accelerate across the border. I mean, this is what happened. And the corporations there were ready with their arms wide open. They had a supply of cheap labor. It was good for them. So here, after people have worked, in some cases many years, they're being told, get out of here, hit the road. We cannot let that happen. We need to make sure that people have a path to legalization to be sure, and we have to have control of our borders. We understand that. But I'm telling you that the core issue here is an issue that relates to disgraceful conditions that have been going on for quite a while because people have been making money out of it. If there weren't people making a lot of money off of that, we wouldn't have had this problem. But because people were making money, and all of a sudden they want to make sure that they can blame the victims. Well, I'm not into blaming the victims. I'm into looking at a problem and dealing with it and making sure at the same time we enforce wage and hour, we enforce workplace safety, we enforce the law with these corporations that have been gaming the system. I mean, you're looking at a real labor president here. That's what you're looking at the potential of. Next question.
I'm from Rensselaer, Indiana, and my question is with the big, Greg Hopkins, with big oil making record profits, do you have planned to do anything to cap gas prices? That's one thing that is really serious about American people right now. I mean, just to travel somewhere takes major funding for people.
Well, you have to look first of all at who's running this country right now. Oil. I mean, why are we in Iraq? Oil. Why are they looking at attacking Iran? Oil. Why did they try to overthrow the government of Venezuela? Thank you, class. Now we're ready for the next lesson. Elect a president who isn't tied into these interest groups. Okay, that's number one. Okay, now, we need to break up the monopolies in oil. We understand that. And I'm free to have a Justice Department that would pursue that action. We also have learned that the oil companies right now cut a deal with the administration where the administration is trying to push the privatization of Iraq oil. Now, I stood on the floor of Congress for an hour about this issue. Iraq's sitting on $21 trillion worth of oil. $21 trillion worth of oil. And the administration wants to privatize the oil so that the U.S. oil corporations will be able to control Iraq's oil. Do you know, if this happens, we'll never be out of Iraq. There'll be war there from now until kingdom come. And so what I say is that we have to, and this relates directly to oil, we have to end the occupation, close the bases, bring our troops home, get out of Iraq, get an international peacekeeping and security force that moves in as our troops leave. We have to stop this trying to control Iraq's oil, and we have to make sure that we create in this country a transition away from reliance on oil with more fuel-efficient vehicles, with fuel cell technologies. We have to rally this country, and that's what the WGA is about, Works Green Administration, away from reliance on oil and towards the kinds of technologies where we can sustain the country. What I see, in a way in which no other candidate does, I see the connection between global warring and global warming, because the two are linked through oil. And if you have a president who's strong enough to stand up and defend this country's basic interests, which are peace and sustainability, then you can have prosperity. But if we have a president who every place they look looks for an opportunity for war, we're going to have fear and poverty. And so I'm ready to take on that challenge, and I'm ready to challenge the oil companies, and I'm ready to move this country on a new path towards sustainability and peace.
Dennis? Over here.
Right here.
Hi, I'm Eve Perry. I'm from Local 9899 in Saginaw, Michigan, St. Mary's Hospital. And I'd like to know, Congressman, how you're going to address our national debt.
Well, you know, first of all, the national debt is about $8.8 trillion. If you have a hole, number one rule, quit digging. Thank you. But the real question is, how do we recover our productive capacity? And this goes back to you. Because what we need to do, we need to see America's capability of creating jobs again. Once we get people working, and once we have a full employment economy, and once we have people working at good-paying jobs, and they have their health care benefits, and their pension benefits are solid, then you start to see the general economy growing. That's why we have to change our trade agreements. That's why we have to stop going into these wars and these adventures that are putting our young men and women on the line for what? You have to remember, this is the one person standing here who understood right from the beginning that the war was wrong, that they didn't have any proof. Now, where do I come from? I come from Cleveland, Ohio. My parents, you know, they worked hard, but never owned a home, 7 kids, lived in 21 different places by the time I was 17, including a couple cars I mentioned. But let me tell you something about me. I can't be sold a phony bill of goods by anyone. I mean, I lived in neighborhoods where people on the street corner would roll up their sleeves and they'd say, "You want to buy a watch?" You know, I never bought one of those watches. I won't buy a phony watch, and I won't buy a phony war. And people need a president who understands how to protect this country by avoiding wars we don't need, who can't be sold a phony bill, and who can't be pushed into wars based on narrow interests. So that war adds to our debt. We're borrowing money from China. Think about how insane that is. We're borrowing money from China to fight the war in Baghdad. Meanwhile, what's happening with our productive capacity? Do you know we have over $1 trillion in infrastructure needs? And we're closing down mills? Think about how wrong that is. And because I know that, because of where I come from, I'm ready to lead this country's economy back, to get those mills going, full go, to make sure that we have our manufacturing base recovered, to get Detroit to start to make cars that people are ready to buy, to have a way of creating a whole new industrial policy that has America on the rise again. I mean, my God, if communist China can do it, can democratic America do it? You can if you have a president who's ready to lead the way. Next question.
Same spot, same spot.
Hi, Jackie Anklem, Local 9899, St. Mary's, Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan. My question to you is, what do you plan on doing for the very low-paying healthcare facility workers?
Well, here again, we need to make a transition. It's, having an increase in the minimum wage, in many cases, just not enough. We need to think in terms of a living wage. Now, match a living wage with a national health care plan where everyone's covered. And then all of a sudden, people who are working at the relatively lower paying jobs suddenly find a position in their lives where they've got money to meet their needs. But that's not the case in America right now, because the healthcare workers you're talking about are not only paid a low amount, but they also see their own health care benefits so low that they can't meet the premiums, the co-pays, and deductibles. How ironic is that? You're working taking care of sick people, and you better not get sick because you won't get the coverage they're getting. And it'll cost you more. I mean, we have to... So, of course, we have to address those issues, but because of how I grew up, I understand the connections. We need to make sure people have a chance for decent housing. We need to make sure people have a chance for a job at a living wage, that they have health care benefits, that their children can go to school. I have a universal pre-kindergarten program so that if you're a healthcare worker and you're not making much, your child's pre-kindergarten will be covered. How are we going to pay for it? By a 10-15% reduction in that bloated Pentagon budget. I mean, I know where the waste is. I understand. We want a strong defense, but nobody's going to hustle me into voting for a weapons system that's going to essentially create a drain on our economy and our ability to meet our needs. Put the money into education. So those are the ways in which I would address your concerns, understanding that we need to lift everyone up. Everyone. Next question.
Hi, Congressman. Steve Wagner from East Chicago, Indiana, Local 1010. I'm concerned about the longevity of our Social Security. Obviously, I'm not there yet, but I know many that are, and I'll be there soon. But President Bush says it's our fault that there's shortcomings with the fund and wants to blame the worker. I say obviously it's the government's fault. There's shortcomings in the fund that needs to get put back in there. What are your ideas to make Social Security secure again?
I held over 20 forums in the Cleveland area a few years ago when Wall Street was trying to force this issue of privatization of Social Security. Let me tell you what a President Kucinich will do. First of all, that money belongs to Main Street, not Wall Street. No to the privatization of Social Security. It's not going to happen with a Kucinich presidency. That's number one. Number two, Social Security is rock solid through the year 2042 without any changes whatsoever. Now, it's true this administration has borrowed money from the trust fund. It's like an IOU. They have to replace it. They're required by law to replace any money they take out, and they've never suggested ever that they wouldn't replace the money. As a matter of fact, they're borrowing money for some other things, but they have to have that money back in the fund. That is an intergenerational compact. In addition to that, I speak to groups of young people where I tell them how important it is to keep that social compact. Let's go all the way back to the days of the Depression and remember that there were things called poorhouses that old folks went to. And people were destitute in their senior years. Social Security was the thing that lifted everyone up. Many of you who are depending on that money, I'm telling you it's going to be there. That is one of the defining purposes of a nation. The retirement security of retirees and the health security of all of its people and education. So we have to start focusing on what's important in America. And I'm telling you, I've looked at the actuarial reports. The money is there. The question is, Will there be a president who is strong enough to stand up to the pressures from Wall Street? Keep in mind, there are at least 3 candidates in this race who are raising millions of dollars from Wall Street, and they're proud of it. Well, I'm proud that I'm not, because I'm free and independent to stand up for workers. Because I'm ready to stand up for workers. And Social Security will be secure because of that. And you'll have a president who will challenge the private insurers and break the hold they have on health care in America, who will be able to challenge the oil companies and break the hold they have on our domestic energy, environment, and international policies, who will be able to challenge all of these groups who for years and years have been impressing on the backs of workers a kind of an economic yoke, keep weighing people down, that no matter how hard you work, you just can't get ahead. Let me tell you something. I remember where I've come from. And I've come from a family that understood the importance of hard work, but life isn't always kind to people who work hard. There has to be a leader of this country who's ready to lift up conditions for all. And as John L. Lewis once said, that when I rise, it is with the ranks, not from the ranks, with the ranks.
Oh, here we go.
Good afternoon, Congressman.
Hi.
I'm Michael Bryan. I'm from northern Indiana. I'd like to know, my question has 2 parts. If you're elected president, will you refuse to sign any trade agreements with countries like Colombia, and will you cut off funding for people that murder people like the people in this room in Colombia today?
I want, first of all, my dad was a truck driver, drove a truck for 35 years. He passed with his first retirement check in his pocket on cash. I am a member right now of Local 600 of the IATSE, Stagehands Union. I've been a member for 15, 16 years because, you know, when you take the kind of stands that I take for the people, occasionally you have to know that you might not always have a job, right? So I always protect my ability to do another line of work. Now let me tell you, we understand that with countries like Colombia and other countries, that workers' rights aren't protected. As a matter of fact, when people exercise their right to organize, it becomes a matter of life and death. You actually take your life into your own hands. So what would it mean then to have a president who rose with the ranks, who stood up for workers all the time? It's very simple, because I get on the phone and I call the president of Colombia and I say, Señor, ayúdame, por favor. Yo creo que los derechos de los trabajadores son muy importantes. And I tell the president of Colombia that he must protect the rights of workers, or the relationship between the United States and Colombia will change dramatically. And all of the things that he would hope for in terms of a relationship with the United States will not happen. I want to communicate to you so that if there's anything that you take home with you as a result of this presentation today, that you will know that you will have one of your own in the White House. Imagine what it will be like to have one of your own in the White House. Someone who cannot be bought, cannot be bossed, cannot be intimidated, someone who has real strength and real courage and the ability to take a stand and the ability to rally workers in the cause of their own basic human dignity. Thank you. Si se puede.
Hello, Harry Fowles from Northern Indiana. The question is okay, we have high gas prices. It appears to me that if we had better public transportation, now I come from a town of 13,000, so no, we don't have buses and all that. let's say I wanted to go from South Bend to Indianapolis is 150 miles. If I don't drive, I don't get there. So what is your thought on more Amtrak, for lack of better words?
Well, you know, being a student of history, I remember that they used to have a thing 100 years ago called the intra-urban, where they had a system of rail in America that just went to every area. And then all of a sudden, you know, just disappeared over a period of time. Cleveland used to have streetcars that would go up and down that were run by electricity. But then the gas-guzzling buses came up when Detroit made their marriage with the oil industry and the tire industry. And then all of a sudden, you saw the streetcars disappear. Mass transit is a defining purpose in an infrastructure bill because you start to lay these rails everywhere. And that's another way, going back to the question of the brother over there about environmental issues, that's another way in which you start to dramatically reduce the carbon footprint. Look, all of us at one time or another have had a chance to travel abroad, and if you've had that chance and you've taken it, you go to Europe and you see trains everywhere. People actually get around pretty easily, and it's pretty cheap to travel by train. Here we are stuck with a technology that they got their hands right in our pockets. Do you know one of the things I found out? I'm the chairman of the Domestic Policy Subcommittee of the United States Congress. Has the broadest jurisdiction of any subcommittee in the Congress, investigative subcommittee. Let me tell you, I found out one of the rackets that the oil companies have going. It's been going on for 100 years. When the temperature goes above 60 degrees, the volume of gas in the tank expands. So what happens is, as the volume expands, you're actually paying for gas you're not getting. It's like ghost gas. You're paying anywhere from $1 to $3 a tank. This summer, American consumers will pay $1.5 billion for this ghost gas. They don't have that in Canada because Canada has temperature adjustment devices on their gas pumps. The oil companies fought this here in the United States because they like to rip off the people of this country, and with this administration, we're all clean for pickings, right? Well, you know what? All this stops because I have the kind of independence that no one else running for president has. The independence that when I was mayor of Cleveland, in this city 30 years ago, gave me the ability to be able to stand up to the banks who were telling me 30 years ago, they said, Mayor, you're going to have to sell your city's municipal electric system to the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company, which the bank was a business partner in, or we're not going to renew the city's credit. I was 31 years old. And they were telling me they're not going to renew the city's credit on loans I hadn't even taken out. And this electric system, this little municipal electric system, provided all the street lights to the city, served a third of the people in the city, sometimes at savings of 15 to 25% on a monthly electric bill, this publicly owned system. On December 15, 1978, I sat in a room with the head of the biggest bank in Ohio. And he told me, Mr. Mayor, you're going to have to sell this system. This is the way it is. And if you don't, we're going to put the city of Cleveland in default. And at that exact moment, let me tell you where I was. My thoughts drifted for a second back to 10712 St. Clair above Martha's Delicatessen in the Glenville neighborhood of Cleveland, where I remember, this was one of the many places we lived in, I remember my parents sitting at a table, one of those old metal top tables that that white cover, and when you chipped it, it was black underneath. And I remember them counting those pennies. Click, 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 click. Just counting the pennies to pay the utility bills. So for a second, I was back there. I was thinking about what it would be like for someone who really, it matters how much you pay for a utility bill. And so I came right back into that room and I said, Mr. Banker, no sale. No, I am not going to sell the soul of the city. I remember where I came from. And because I remember where I've come from, I'll be there to make those decisions on behalf of workers. I'll be there to stand up when no one else is looking, when no one else is in the room, to be there representing the hopes and aspirations of workers everywhere.
Here we go.
Good afternoon, Congressman. My name is Mark Berrigan. I'm the president of Local 1299 out of southeastern Michigan. And I have sort of a three-pointed question for you. Two of the points are issues that you raised in your presentation today. A little bit of explanation of how you would go about canceling NAFTA. The second question up is a follow-up question of how we would firm up the PBGC. And being from southeastern Michigan, there's a lot of discussion and debate about CAFE. So if you would please present your views on CAFE, I'd appreciate that.
The first part of your question related to the, which one do you want me to take first? NAFTA, okay. Well, here's how George Bush took me to school on NAFTA. It's the only thing he actually has ever taken me to school on. One of his first acts in office was to cancel the ABM treaty with Russia. Now, I thought that was a horrible thing for him to do, so I went to federal court and tried to overturn that. And here's what I learned. That ABM's a treaty, and that the president has a right to withdraw from the treaties, even without going back to the Senate, which ratified. I was very surprised to learn that. But then, when I heard that, I said, thank you. I said, thank you, because the president has the right to cancel NAFTA and to go back to create conditions for trade. That's a right. Now, these people say you're going to fix it. Well, if they say they're going to fix it, then they're saying they have the right to fix it. Think about that. We also have the right to cancel it. Now people will tell you, oh, no, we can't go there. Oh, really? Why not? Why? Because somebody in Wall Street doesn't want it to happen? Let me tell you something. This is an issue that if we don't deal with it in this election, you're not going to have another chance to deal with it. Because what little manufacturing base we have in this country is going to be gone. Because that's the momentum. That's where all these leveraged buyouts and IPOs, and that's the way it's all going. All these hedge funds, it's all going in that direction. One opportunity, and you're looking at it right here. So now let's go to the PBGC. To me, it's always been more than passing strange that these companies can liquidate their assets and take care of all their officers and even have money to create another company down the line somewhere, but they stick their retirees with just pennies on the dollar with what's left in terms of their pension benefits. Here's the way I see it. I mentioned earlier about changing the laws to put pensions right up there, right at number one as a priority claim. That's number one. Number two, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation has to be firmed up. We've got to put some resources into it. That money has to come from the public and the private sector. We cannot see that fund, which there's tremendous demands on right now, depleted. But we also have to look at the private sector and how they're gaming the system. I can't, it's hard to imagine how someone can work for 20, 30 years or more and all of a sudden be told, look, the company went bankrupt, you're going to be lucky if you get a couple pennies on the dollar of your retirement benefit. To me, that's immoral. That's criminal. That goes beyond what anything should be tolerated, what should be tolerated in a democratic society. So I see the protection of pension funds as being a central purpose. And I think that we have to start getting the Justice Department involved. And let me tell you how. We have to look at issues of fraud with respect to the funding of the pensions. Because if they didn't have those pensions funded right from the beginning, then we have to ask why. And if there's fraud involved, then these people who are running these corporations have to understand that their personal freedom depends on those pensions being properly funded. And if they're not properly funded, they're going to go to jail for a long time. Period. This isn't even a close question. This is, so what you do is you start right at the beginning. We will get the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation involved in auditing. We'll have the Justice Department involved in auditing. We'll look at all these pension funds that are out there, and it becomes a sacred purpose of government to protect the pensions. Now let's talk about fuel efficiency standards. We have lost an incredible amount of market share because Detroit wasn't making the kind of cars that people were buying. Now, I know that there's been resistance to fuel efficiency, but you know what? With the high cost of gasoline, with gas being a diminishing resource, or oil being a diminishing resource, fuel efficiency is the way we have to go. And so I've always been a strong supporter of the auto workers. I have a 100% labor voting record. I want to see the power of government working with the private sector to help create those products where everybody's interested in buying American again. I mean, we have to do this. And this becomes a defining purpose. The kind of president that I intend to be is the kind who looks at the strengths that we have in the private sector, who looks at our productive capacity in this country and puts it all together and uses it to create wealth. We have not even begun to tap our wealth creation abilities in this country. But the problem is that those who have the most economic power have been only concerned about the wealth of a few at the expense of the many. And when you have politicians who go along with that ride because they're being backed by those interests, they're powerless to change the direction. And so we can work with steel, automotive, aerospace, shipping, with a new American manufacturing policy where the manufacturers are going to have help from me because I'm going to tell them you don't have to worry about going under because you can't afford to pay health care benefits anymore, because we're going to have a national health care plan. We're going to make sure everyone's covered. Your workforce is going to be healthy. You've got a trained and dedicated workforce. We're going to build you a new infrastructure. You're going to have a chance to create more jobs, and you're going to grow. When you put that message out to American industry, people will be ready for a new direction. And we'll be ready because we'll have strong unions again. We'll have unions that will be able to say no to somebody that tells them, look, we're going to increase your hours or we're going to cut your wages or whatever. No, the whole dynamic changes. We start to negotiate for higher wages again. We start to negotiate for real benefits again. We strengthen the position of workers again. I've just told you in the last few minutes that we've had to spend together here where I stand and what it would mean for me to be President of the United States, what it means for you. And you know that no other candidate even comes close to taking these kinds of positions. And I'm not new to this. I started my career 40 years ago in this community as a city councilman, an elected clerk of courts, a mayor of Cleveland, a state senator, six-term U.S. congressman, someone who came from the ranks, rose with the ranks. I know what people go through in this country. I know what my own family went through, and I would look at myself as being the father of that extended American family to make sure that the children have a roof over their head, have a decent education, have health care benefits, have jobs. You know the house I live in right now? House I bought in 1971 for $22,500. That's where I come from. I don't need to put on airs. I don't need to impress anyone, because I know who I am and I know what I stand for. And I know this system has been rigged against workers, and you know that too. You know the trade laws have been rigged against workers. I mean, you could have candidates come before you and they can talk to you about the right to organize, but Leo, let's talk about the right to organize when the plant's closed. We have to start thinking about how do we recover our productive capacity. I'm not a missionary to workers. This is where I come from. And I'm prepared to act on behalf of workers because I can't be bought and I can't be bossed and I can't be broken. I lost that election in '79 after taking that stand on behalf of the workers because the bank, on behalf of the electric system, because the bank put the city of Cleveland into default. And it took me 15 years to make a comeback to a high elected office of a state senator. 15 years. But I persisted because I have the courage to survive and the courage to believe. And because I know that everyone in this audience and people all across this country, every day is a struggle to survive. And that if one leader comes with the ranks and moves forward, who understands what people go through, everything changes. You no longer have to choose between candidates who you hope they won't, but you know will sell you out at the critical time. Because you now have a real choice. A real choice. One who knows that we're fighting for America. We're fighting to reestablish jobs. We're fighting for our basic industries. We're fighting for our health care. We're fighting for our retirement security. We're fighting for a new role for America in the world, one that connects security with peace. We're fighting for dignity and recognition. We're fighting to lift up the role of workers in our society. We're fighting to make sure that that light of economic justice shines brightly and sheds its light over this entire country. 100% labor. Think about it. When you have a president that you can call your own. Thank you.